Hey everybody, Will, just time prepping. Welcome to Story Time with Will. But before we get going, let me tell you that, hey, snow has arrived. Which means caught up to the rest of the world out there on the East Coast. Alright, you guys, it's like I've been looking before I get started. We're 9% into the book. We're into chapter 6 already, I can't believe it. And it's called The Enemy and the Traitor, and it's January 29th, and it's outside Trinidad, Colorado. So here we go. Not again, Rick moved towards the center of the large, reeking camp as he fought against the sharp Colorado wind. I won't do it. He knew why he'd been called to the boss's tent. Trinidad, Colorado was big, and the survivors there had the town barricaded with machine guns that were constantly manned. The evil troll wanted him to be the wolf in sheep's clothing. Again. Walking steadily, the white man kept to himself, pretending not to understand the lazy Spanish insults from those he passed. The faint noise of crying and begging was nearly overshadowed by the lustful shouts of men and the excited yapping of dogs. Mexican R&R, Rick thought. His pale skin was out of place. His life constantly in danger in the slaver camp. And Rick liked it. The white women here didn't feel the same as the few being allowed to sit in the open air. Were chained to their masters, and they observed Rick go by with open contempt on their battered faces. These were the favorite girls. The ones whose bodies would be left on the side of the highway in a week or a month instead of tonight or tomorrow. Rick stopped in front of a crooked tent and tapped on the flap before shoving his cold hands into his pockets of his dirty jeans. Most of Caesar's men were drunk and in a good mood. The church decided they'd desecrated in Santa Fe 4 days ago had been full of women and kids who'd gone there for sanctuary, but it wasn't a friendly mood. The tremors in Rick's stomach doubled as the flakes of black snow began to fall. What did these brutal invaders know that I didn't? Gunshots echoed loudly from the other end of the carelessly sprawled-out camp, followed by the young scream. The wind gusted smoke from the neglected campfires as men hit, women bled, and the snow clouds rolled over the dark landscape. South was where they'd been, north was where they were going, and the firelight of Trinidad was a tempting dim glow through the distant trees. Wait! The Mexican leader's cold tone carried to his men, and Rick saw the widening grins of the 24 or so watching men. They dressed like Spanish bandits with their crisscross belts, wide-brimmed sombreros, and they also acted like them, enjoying any chance to make him squirm. They wanted him to know that only Caesar's orders kept him from the fate of all the other white males they'd found. Tense but not scared, Rick watched them right back, daring. He might be an outside member, but Rick was also Caesar's personal property, and the short, stocky leader would kill anyone who touched what was his. It kept Rick from the horrible death they had often threatened, but it didn't stop him from being beaten. The freed inmate wasn't exactly sure what it was that kept him here. There had been plenty of chances to escape, but Rick hadn't even tried. Maybe it was the lack of rules, or how he felt more alive than ever before, like a real man should feel, as he stayed among these violent killers, keeping his life where no other white man had so far. Rick sighed, turning from an icy blast of wind. Maybe he had the death wish. He was sure that eventually he would be eliminated, but for now he was surviving where no one else could, and he straightened his shoulders. They could only kill him once. He swept lumps in the darkness, seeing jackrabbits, bats, larks, and people. Hell, a quick bullet to the temple or a knife in the throat might be easier, and the rest of the world was suffering. Come in, Richard. Rick's attention snapped back to why he had been called, and there was a battle in his mind as he entered the debating. His decision. Vaguely glad to be out of the sight of the unshaven, dirty slavers who were camped directly on the dark concrete lanes of US 25, as if they owned it, he saw that the tent was the same. Only the bait was different. The first time Caesar had called him there, Rick had been so relieved to be spared that he agreed without thinking. Salem time slowed as he remembered. Rick tightened his grip on the struggling, naked female beneath him, smelling Caesar's cigar as he leaned in and pinched the girl's nose shut. You wish to live, yes? Rick couldn't stop as he jerked forward, wincing at the scream as he buried his hard flesh into the struggling body underneath him. I know, Americano, you will. The slaver's blade went against his throat. Sharp knife pricking the skin with each stroke, and Rick moaned, scared and on fire. Rick nodded carefully, struggling not to slit his throat, as he raped the naked woman Caesar had thrown into his arms. His hand slid around her neck to keep her from screaming again and to get a better grip. Whatever you want, he gasped, hips flashing. Squeeze harder, the slaver ordered. She breathed too easy. That had been the heat of the lust and fear. Now it would be a morally conscious decision, and Rick wasn't sure which way he would fall, only that he would. Caesar was on the bed, rolling a thick line of white powder into a blunt paper, something that Rick had never seen anyone do before. He waited just inside the awful-smelling mess, shifty green eyes going over the man in the dirty gray robe who claimed to be the bastard son of Fidel Castro. Trying not to stare at the naked slave kneeling at her master's booted feet, his gaze swept filthy clothes, a blanket, scraps of food, and her dog collar and chain purposely prevented the shivering girl from reaching any of these items. Rick had time to think he liked the look of the heavy metal, and then reality crashed in on him. Richard, it is time to pay for the second month of life. I have decided to give you... The Mexican accent was thick, but understandable. Rick's stomach dropped the rest of the way. He rubbed his damp palms, dirty jeans, trying to cover his nervousness. What do you want me to do? Slightly distracted as he was meant to be, Rick tried hard to ignore the naked teenager and failed at it. He could see tears falling, but not the face, covered by shiny brown curls. Trinidad, Colorado? Caesar sneered, making it ugly. We will be there in a few days. You go with La Salida del Sol. Also, Rick said nothing, knowing not to tell the ruthless slaver he wouldn't leave at sunrise. Caesar peered at him in a warning. The Mexican's left hand clenched into a half fist, 2 fingers on the side missing. See? Rick dropped his eyes. I can't do that. The former janitor's voice was low and apologetic, making his 5'11", 190-pound frame appear much smaller as he stood in the flickering shadows. I'm sorry, not again. You'll have to kill me, I guess. Caesar smiled, revealing a single gold front tooth that flashed in the dim lantern light of the drafty tent. All in good time, Richard. Caesar waved a ringed finger at his slave, quickly climbed into the large pile of blankets behind the ruthless man. She was clearly terrified, tender flesh shaking. Rick felt a small measure of pity, but it was mostly drowned out by the envy that Cesar Castro Diaz was getting her all to himself when Rick hadn't had a woman since they'd left the prison and taken the first town, Salem, where he'd helped to kill them all. There was a brief moment in time, a few seconds, where Rick's attention was captured by the outside noises, and he thought of how bad and wrong it was here and had been in Arizona and New Mexico. He heard gunshots, a scream, a louder scream, a bigger gunshot, a fading scream. Then everything settled down to the dim quiet of the bait girl's shallow, fearful breathing and the howling of the storm now starting to beat against the tent. Richard! It was an ugly tone, hinting at the slight insanity of most Caesar's men respected. I can't. They're my own people. The Mexican's eyes narrowed and a blue vein began to stand in his forehead. He pointed with his deformed hand. Mi slavo la vida. I spared your life. You will give me what I want. Rick kept his mouth shut and waited for the offer. Sure there would be one. Why else had he been allowed to live except to serve? He was a slave like the women, only in a harder way. Against his will, he crawled over the freshly washed teenager again, though he knew it might get him in more trouble. He had never had one that young. Excuse me, folks. Caesar, whose Mexican nickname was Hijo de la Muerte, son of death, waved a hand at the scared girl. Herredelas! She immediately rolled over and pushed herself up, trembling as her breast hung low. Rick felt his mouth go dry, body twitching in response. You want her? See? He nodded once carefully. This female and all the leader's young harem was off limits to everyone with no exceptions. You will have her for doing what I want. Rick fell. Section 2. Cesar Diaz was a flesh peddler and he wanted guerrilla captain before the war. When all hell broke loose, he was already on his way to southern Arizona to rescue family being held in American detention centers. Raised at the knee of a dictator, Caesar had always hated America. He often dreamed of filling the United States with as many of his bastards as he could, hoping to leave an occupied land. With the war, the border patrols vanished and America was invaded. Caesar does not have camp laws, doctors, or plans for organization, and he has no intentions of forming or finding basics of society. He rules with brute force, and in his world the strongest survive and the weakest die, as they were meant to. When the war gave him the opportunity, he chose to spend his life conquering America. He has the full support of his men, most of whom he released from prisons and detention centers. That's also where he found Rick, cowering in a broom closet after opening the front gates to let him in. The 35-year-old ward of the state had been a janitor doing community service for attempted sexual assault on a teenager at the movie theater where he worked. Caesar wanted to kill Rick, but his cousin Jose, one of those he'd come to release, told him of Rick giving extra supplies to the prisoners and reporting abuse by the guards. Caesar decided to spare him, feeling a debt, and as he repaid it cruelly by turning Rick into a traitor to his country. Caesar's men aren't loyal, trusting, or trustworthy, but as a leader, Caesar is smart. To keep them in line, he makes sure his men have everything they want. Freedom and adventure, whiskey and guns, and females, some of them not even old enough to have their hair anywhere but their heads. It is all he has promised them and more. This large group of hardened criminals is slowly traveling north, clearing towns along Interstate 25. They are emptying stores, burning businesses and homes, and when they feel like it, entire neighborhoods of scared, defenseless survivors. Word is spreading from fleeing refugees, and communities are fleeing their homes together. Most of the small groups in the slaver's path are doomed to fall easily, but some of those ill-fated survivors have barricaded their cities to make a stand. They will lose and pay the ultimate price, but like so many in this country, violent history, they will die fighting as American heroes. Right, you guys, that's it for today. A short one, huh? Right at 15 minutes. The next one is going to be Chapter 7. It will be called The Hero Safe Haven Refugee Camp, and it will start in Utah. So, as you can see, it's getting pretty darn interesting, and if you really think about it, it could carry over into real life if we were to possibly get into a nuclear war. So it's my opinion that we don't want to go to nuclear war, so don't think that it can't happen. If it does, we could end up like this story. So it's just some food for thought for you guys, okay? Hope you enjoyed the story. You guys know that we have tomorrow is the live stream, and we'll be taking down names for the drawing on Saturday night. So if you're one of my new viewers, enjoy the story, and as usual, I'll see you on Wednesday morning. Thanks for watching.